My name is Sandra S. Bell, and I'm 33 years old. They were celebrating in my living room when she said it, and the sick part is, I wasn't even surprised. Not really. For the past decade, I've lived what most of my family would call a quiet life, the kind they confuse with weakness because I don't perform. I'm not flashy. I don't post much. I don't beg for approval. And because of that, I learned one consistent truth about my family early on. If you're not demanding attention, you're forgotten, or worse, labeled the backup, the extra, the one who can be counted on without being valued. Growing up, I was always the other child. My younger brother Connor was the golden one, athletic, charming, loud in all the right ways, the type of kid who could break a window playing football and get a laugh out of it. If I forgot to do a chore because I was studying, it was disrespectful. Every compliment I got was framed around Connor like he was the measuring stick for my entire existence. You did well on your test, Sandra. Maybe you'll catch up to your brother someday. I never made a fuss, not because I didn't feel it, but because deep down I thought if I stayed the course, if I worked hard and kept my head down, they'd see me eventually, appreciate me, or at the very least stop using me as a contrast to make Connor look shinier. I graduated early, got a job in tech, and eventually bought a modest but beautiful home just outside the city. I didn't announce it. I didn't invite anyone over for a tour. I didn't post a photo holding a giant novelty key. I just built my life one step at a time, like someone laying bricks in a storm, steady, quiet, stubborn. When the pandemic hit and remote work became permanent, I poured my energy into renovating the house with my own hands. It was a labor of love, not a hobby. Every tile, every shelf, every little detail became proof that I could create a place where I felt safe. The house became my sanctuary, my space, which made it all the more insulting when my mother began referring to it as Connor's future home, like it was already decided, and the only thing left was timing. The lead-up didn't happen overnight. It took years, and it started with a phone call 6 months ago. My mom said, "Hey, sweetie," in that sing-song voice she uses when she wants something, and I felt my shoulders tighten before she even finished the first sentence. She said Connor was looking for a place to propose to Natalie. Of course I remembered Natalie. She'd been around long enough to feel like a permanent fixture in my mother's fantasies, the perfect future daughter-in-law who laughed at the right jokes and dressed like she belonged in the family photos. My mom giggled and added, "She's a fiancé now, technically," like the ring was already on her finger just because my mother said it out loud. Then she said it might be nice to do it at my place. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to be generous, but because of the way she said it, like my house was a venue the family could book. I asked, "My place," already knowing where this was going, and my mom brushed past it with that breezy confidence she uses when she assumes the answer will be yes. She said Connor wanted something intimate, and my backyard was lovely with the lights and the wooden deck I built and the little fire pit area, and she said, "Remember when you showed me that? It's perfect." She said I wouldn't even have to worry about anything because they would handle food, decorations, everything, like I was being offered the gift of not having to do work in my own home. "So it's a proposal," I said, and she said yes, and then a little celebration afterward, just close family and a few friends. I said yes like an idiot. I said yes, partly because I assumed it would be small, and partly because I won't lie. A part of me was flattered. It felt like they were finally acknowledging that I'd made something of myself, that maybe for once my space was worth showing off, that maybe they saw me. That illusion didn't last long. The proposal turned into an engagement party, then a rehearsal dinner, and before I could catch my breath, they were calling it the family estate. My mom said it casually one night while I was on the phone with her, like she was discussing the weather. "When Connor and Natalie move in, maybe they'll let you stay in the guest room, just like old times." I laughed because it sounded absurd, and then I realized she wasn't laughing with me. She was testing how much she could say out loud before I pushed back. It got worse. Connor started stopping by unannounced with Natalie, showing her around like he was the listing agent, and I was the tenant who should be grateful for the tour. I caught him once sketching something in a notebook on my kitchen counter, the same counter I sanded and sealed myself. I asked what he was doing, and he grinned and said he was just coming up with layout ideas, for when we redo the place. He said Natalie wanted an open concept between the kitchen and living area, maybe a skylight or two, and he had a buddy who could redo the floors for cheap. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like I should be relieved he was willing to improve my home for me. "Connor," I said flatly, "this is my house. Yeah, of course, he said. But then he added, Mom said you might be looking to move eventually, and I figured. And he didn't even finish the sentence because he didn't have to. In his mind, my life was temporary, and his was the real story, and my house was a waiting room until the main character arrived. Every time I tried to bring it up and set a boundary, I got steamrolled. Don't be so sensitive, my mom would say. Connor's just excited. Or you've always been so generous, Sandra. Don't start being petty now. That one really got to me, because it turned self-defense into selfishness. As if saying this is my home was some kind of character flaw. As if protecting the life I built made me the villain. Then came the engagement party. They didn't even ask. I just got a group text from my mom that said, save the date, Connor and Natalie's engagement bash at Sandra's place. The flyer she attached had a picture of my backyard on it, the pergola I constructed, the garden lights I wired, all displayed like it was part of their love story. I didn't reply to the text, not even a thumbs up, but I didn't stop it either, not yet, because part of me wanted to see how far they'd go, and part of me wanted to know if they would ever realize how wrong it was. They didn't. The day of the party, I watched from the upstairs window as guests trickled in, strangers and relatives carrying gifts and wine like they were arriving at a place that belonged to Connor. My house, the one I mowed and painted and repaired, was decorated in gaudy balloons and banners. There was a giant sign over the front door that said, "The future begins here," and I remember staring at that sign and feeling like I was watching someone write over my name with a marker that wouldn't wash off. Inside, my kitchen was transformed into a serving station. They brought in catering trays and moved my furniture to make room for a makeshift bar. My framed photos had been taken down and replaced with engagement photos of Connor and Natalie. Even my art, the paintings I collected slowly over years, had been stuffed into a hallway closet like they were clutter. When I came downstairs, nobody greeted me like the homeowner. They greeted me like the help. One of Connor's friends asked if I could grab more ice from the garage, like he was ordering a favor he'd already paid for. Natalie barely acknowledged me. Connor was already tipsy, arms slung around her, giving a speech to a circle of relatives while standing on the deck I built. I lingered near the doorway, watching, wondering if anyone would even thank me, and feeling something shift inside me from hope to observation, like I was taking notes for a future version of myself that wouldn't be fooled. That's when my mom raised her glass. She began a toast on the deck steps like she was the queen of a kingdom she didn't own, and she said how proud she was of her boys, especially Connor, her shining star, the one born for big things. People clapped. She wasn't done. Then she turned her smile toward me, sweet and sharp at the same time, and she said, and to Sandra, like she was about to offer something kind. You were always the backup daughter, the steady one, the one who didn't need much, and we're so grateful, so grateful that you've shared this space with your brother. He deserves it. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I just raised my glass, nodded slowly, and stepped back into the house because what they didn't know, what nobody in that backyard knew, was that 2 days before the party, I'd had a quiet meeting with someone, a woman named Liana. And while my family was outside celebrating my brother's engagement in a house they thought was already his, the doorbell was scheduled to ring at exactly 6:42 p.m. The doorbell rang precisely at 6:42 p.m., and the sound cut through the party like a knife sliding under a rib. I was standing in the hallway, half in shadow, listening to the muffled laughter and clinking glasses spilling in from the backyard. The scent of catered shrimp skewers and cheap white wine hung thick in the air, mixed with the artificial sweetness of whatever candle my mother had decided smelled like success. And outside, my family was celebrating Connor and Natalie in a house they'd already mentally inherited. And my pulse stayed strangely calm, not because I wasn't furious, but because fury is exhausting when you've carried it for years. This was different. This was the moment everything stopped being emotional and became factual. I opened the door and Liana stepped inside with quiet confidence, the kind of confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. She wore navy slacks, a cream blouse, and carried a leather folder tucked neatly under one arm. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat ponytail, and when her eyes met mine, they didn't flinch at the noise, or the decorations, or the way the house looked like it had been rented for the night. She glanced past my shoulder, taking in the streamers, the makeshift bar, the engagement photos that had replaced mine, and she asked softly, Do they know? Not yet, I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. She gave a small, tight smile, the kind that said she understood exactly why this was happening without needing a speech. Should be fun, she murmured. I offered her a drink out of habit, the reflex of someone raised to host, even when she's being invaded, but she declined. Instead, she opened her folder and began sorting documents at my entryway console, like she'd done it 1,000 times. Deed transfer. Title confirmation. A polite notice to vacate for a non-owner residence. We drafted it more for formality than force, because technically no one lived here but me, but I wanted something in writing that matched the truth, something that couldn't be laughed off as Sandra being dramatic. We waited for a minute, maybe two, letting my mother's toast settle into the air outside like a stain. I could still hear Connor's booming laugh, his friends calling out for another round, Natalie's voice rising with that bright, performative gratitude she used whenever she was being admired. I watched Liana's hands, steady and efficient, and I realized how different it felt to stand beside someone who didn't need my family's approval to respect me. I nodded once, and we stepped out together. The backyard fell silent the moment we appeared, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. Laughter died in an awkward stutter. Faces shifted from tipsy delight to confusion to irritation. Connor's smirk faded, his brows pinching like his brain couldn't compute why I'd interrupt his spotlight. My mother, still holding her wineglass from the last toast, squinted at Liana like she was an unexpected tax collector who'd shown up at the party to ruin the mood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to sound triumphant. I just spoke clearly, like I was reading out a fact. Everyone, I said, this is Liana. She owns the house now. For a moment, no one reacted, because disbelief is a powerful sedative. Then my dad chuckled, the same dismissive chuckle he used when he wanted to shrink me back into my place. Don't be dramatic, Sandra, he said, like the words could erase paperwork. Liana stepped forward with a polite, measured smile. Actually, she's not, she said calmly. I finalized the paperwork this morning. I'm the new legal owner of this property. You're all welcome to stay for the rest of the evening, of course, but after tonight, this is no longer a family residence. Connor stood up slowly from his seat near the fire pit, looking around like he expected someone to jump out and yell prank. Wait, he said, laughing too loud. What are you talking about? This is my sister's house. It was, Liana replied, not unkindly, until she sold it. My mother's face drained of color so quickly it was almost frightening, not because she was hurt, but because she was losing control in front of an audience. You're joking, she snapped, eyes flicking between me and Liana, like she was searching for a weak point. I'm not, Liana said simply. My mother turned on me. Why would you do that? She demanded, and the rage in her voice wasn't about losing my home. It was about losing her plan. Sandra, this is your brother's engagement party. Exactly, I said, and I surprised myself with how calm I sounded, like I'd finally stepped outside of my own emotions and was just narrating reality. His party, in my house, a house you decorated, rearranged, and took over without ever asking if that was okay. You planned an entire future around my property, Mom. You stood on my deck and toasted Connor like this was already his. Connor threw his arms out as if he was appealing to the crowd. Come on, he said, voice sharp with humiliation. This is insane. Why would you sell the house to some stranger? She's not a stranger, I said. She's a business partner. I'm investing in a new property with her downtown, an apartment complex, one I own half of. The words landed differently than I expected because I saw it in their faces, the sudden realization that I hadn't been sitting quietly waiting to be chosen. I'd been building, quietly, while they were busy using my life as a placeholder. Natalie leaned in and whispered something to Connor, her eyes darting around the guests, already calculating what this would look like on social media and how fast she'd need to control the story. Connor ignored her, still staring at me like I'd committed a crime by not staying predictable. My mother tried to steady herself by reaching for the oldest script. You're being petty, she said, and her voice rose with every word. You're punishing us for being excited, for trying to celebrate your brother's milestone. I blinked slowly. You called me the backup daughter in front of everyone, I said. That was a joke, she snapped, too fast, too defensive. It wasn't, I said, and the air felt colder. And it wasn't the first time. It's just the first time you said it out loud with enough people around to make it sound like a speech. I looked around and saw the ripple effect. A couple of cousins went quiet, eyes dropping to the ground. One of Connor's friends suddenly found his shoes fascinating. My aunt shifted uncomfortably, the first sign that someone might actually be seeing what had always been there. Liana cleared her throat gently, bringing it back to business, because business doesn't bend for family denial. "There's no rush tonight," she said, calm as ever. "Enjoy your gathering. But please be aware I'll need access to the property for inspection starting tomorrow. I'll send formal notice to whoever needs it." Connor looked like he wanted to punch something, but he couldn't punch paperwork. My mother looked like she wanted to cry, but it wasn't grief in her eyes. It was humiliation. My father's expression stayed hard, and then he said the quiet part out loud, the part they always hid behind jokes. "You're just jealous," he said, like he was diagnosing me, like jealousy was the only explanation that didn't require him to admit he'd failed me. The words hit like a slap, not because they were new, but because of how casually he said them, like decades of being ignored could be reduced to a petty emotion. I stared at him for a long moment and realized I didn't have to fight for my truth anymore. The truth was standing next to me, holding the deed. "You think I'm jealous of him," I said slowly. "I built something real. I worked for it. And you all treated it like a waiting room until the real child was ready to move in. So no, I'm not jealous. I'm just done." Connor's face twisted. "This is your problem," he said, voice shaking now. "You always needed to make a point." "No," I replied, and the calm in my voice felt like a lock clicking shut. "You just never noticed the point until it cost you something." I didn't wait for another argument. I turned and walked back into the house. Liana followed, and the sliding door closed behind us with a soft click that sounded louder than my mother's toast. Inside, the air felt cooler, quieter, like the house itself was exhaling. Liana leaned against my counter, arms folded, and asked, "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "No," I said, "but I will be." Behind us, through the window, I saw Connor pacing with his hands on his head, my mother gesturing wildly like she could wave the truth away. My father sitting down again, like the weight of it still hadn't settled, like he believed the world would reset if he waited long enough. The funny thing was, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, like I'd finally let go of a rope I'd been gripping so tightly my hands were bleeding. I went upstairs and shut myself in my bedroom, soon to be someone else's, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall while the party downstairs dissolved into awkward exits. My phone buzzed with a text from Connor. "You'll regret this. Family is forever." I stared at the words for a long time, then deleted the message without replying, because sometimes family isn't forever. Sometimes it's just a weight you finally learn to set down. They left in waves. First the cousins with tight-lipped smiles and forced goodbyes, then Connor's friends whispering as they slipped out the front gate. My parents lingered the longest, and I could hear their voices downstairs, low and tense and desperate, but I didn't go back down. That house wasn't mine anymore. I'd already made peace with that, or at least I told myself I had. The next morning, I was gone before dawn with a suitcase, a duffel bag, and a folder of signed documents. Everything else stayed. Furniture, dishes, the decorations they'd hung like they owned the place, all of it. I left it behind like an old skin I no longer wanted to wear. The only thing I took from the living room was a single framed photo of me at 18, standing in front of the house the day I moved in, holding the keys like they were a prize, because back then I thought that house meant I'd made it, that I'd finally earned respect, and now I understood something I should have learned a long time ago. Respect doesn't come from what you build, it comes from who's willing to see you build it. For the first 2 weeks after I left, I stayed in a small studio apartment downtown that smelled faintly like fresh paint and loneliness. The walls were bare, the windows too tall, the silence heavy in a way that made it hard to sleep. I answered work emails on autopilot, ate cold takeout straight from the container, and lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the party in fragments like a broken film reel. There were moments, brief and dangerous ones, when I almost called them, almost apologized, almost tried to smooth it over the way I always had. Then I would remember my mother raising her glass and calling me the backup daughter, the way Connor sketched renovation plans on my counter like he was inheriting a throne, and I would stay quiet. They didn't call me either, not once. The first real contact came in the form of a letter from my father. It arrived in a plain white envelope, typed, formal, signed with his full name like it was a legal document instead of something meant for his daughter. He called my actions immature, emotionally manipulative, and a betrayal of family unity. He said I had embarrassed them, humiliated Connor, and that if I had resentments, I should have come to them privately instead of making a spectacle. Not once did he ask if I was okay. Not once did he acknowledge the years of being overlooked. He ended it with a sentence that made me laugh out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly him. "You're welcome back into the family when you're ready to act like an adult." I folded the letter once, then again, and placed it in a drawer I never opened. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured myself into the new project with Liana. Liana and I had been scouting properties for months before any of this happened. She was a former real estate attorney turned investor, sharp as a blade and twice as quiet. We met at a conference where I gave a small talk on property tech integrations, and she approached me afterward with questions that actually showed she'd listened. Over coffee, then another, then several more, we realized we shared the same obsession with long-term vision. She didn't care about flash or headlines. She cared about sustainability, about building things that lasted longer than applause. The apartment complex we invested in wasn't glamorous. Not yet. It was a half-gutted brick building on the edge of a growing district, the kind of place most people overlooked. But to me, it had something my house never did, potential that wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. Every morning I showed up at 7 with coffee and blueprints, met contractors, took notes, got my hands dirty. No family watching over my shoulder. No brother minimizing my progress. No parents offering half-hearted praise. Just work, just results, just me. Slowly, the hollow space they left began to fill. Not with revenge, not even with pride, but with peace. Then the world circled back, because it always does. It was a Thursday morning when I saw Connor again. I was in line at a bakery near the construction site, holding a muffin and scrolling through an invoice on my phone when I heard his voice behind me, smug and familiar. "Wow, look who's slumming it with carbs." I turned. He looked the same, designer hoodie, sunglasses pushed up on his head, confidence slightly cracked around the edges. "Connor," I said. He stepped closer, eyes scanning me like he was looking for signs of regret. "So this is where you live now. Bet Mom's thrilled." I didn't bite. "Are you following me?" "Natalie works a block over," he said quickly. "We're apartment hunting." He paused, then tilted his head. "I saw your name on one of the blueprints outside. Didn't think you had it in you." "Had what in me?" I asked. "Selling the house. Kicking us out like that. You really went for the jugular." "It was my house," I said quietly. "You can't kick people out of something they never owned." He laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, you didn't just burn a bridge. You napalmed it. Mom's still crying over that speech." I remembered her smile that night, the way she'd said back up like it was a compliment. She hadn't been crying then. Connor leaned closer. "You made your point. Fine. You're not second best. But you proved it to the wrong people." "I didn't prove anything," I said. "I stopped pretending." He shook his head like I was someone he couldn't decode anymore. "You changed." "No," I said. "You just finally saw me without a doormat under my feet." He didn't answer. He turned and walked out of the bakery, leaving behind the smell of burnt coffee and entitlement. That night, I sat in my rented loft above the site with a bottle of wine on the windowsill, watching the city buzz below. Somewhere, people were celebrating. Somewhere else, people were grieving. I sat in the quiet between the two, and when my phone rang, I let it ring. It was my mother. I didn't answer. Some calls aren't meant to be picked up, not until you're done rising. 3 weeks passed before I listened to my mother's voicemail. I don't know what shifted in me exactly. Maybe I was tired of carrying the weight of what I hadn't heard yet. Maybe I was finally strong enough not to flinch. Or maybe I needed to hear it once, clearly, to know there was nothing left to salvage. I sat on the floor of my loft with the city lights blinking through the window, legs crossed, phone on speaker, and let her voice fill the room. "Hi, sweetheart," she began, soft and careful, the tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable without taking responsibility. "I don't know if you're still upset, but I miss you. We all do, Connor especially." I exhaled slowly. I could already hear the gaps where the truth should have been. "I know things got out of hand. Maybe we said things we shouldn't have, but you have to understand, family makes mistakes. It doesn't mean you cut people out. You've always been the steady one, Sandra, the strong one. Don't let one night erase everything we've been through. One night. She still believed this was about one night. Not the years of comparison, the casual entitlement, the way my life was treated like a staging area for Connors. She didn't mention calling me the backup daughter. She didn't mention the flyer with my backyard on it. She swept it all into the familiar excuse of family. Makes mistakes and kept going. Anyway, she said, like she was pivoting to the real reason she called. I know this isn't your concern, but Connor and Natalie are struggling a bit. They were really counting on that house. They've been looking at apartments, but it's just not the same. I was wondering if maybe you could help, even just with a down payment. We all know you're doing well now. I paused the message and laughed. A short sound that startled me. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly predictable. No apology, no accountability, just a reminder that I was strong, therefore useful. Again. I set the phone down, poured myself a drink, and stared at the ceiling until the idea came to me, not out of spite or anger, but out of clarity. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to explain. I was going to show them what no looked like when it didn't need permission. 4 blocks from where Connor and Natalie were renting sat a tired 2-bedroom duplex that had been on the market for almost a year. Warped floors, outdated plumbing, a sagging fence. No one wanted it. But the location was excellent, and to me, that meant leverage. I bought it quietly under my LLC and paid cash. Then I renovated it. Not into a home for them, into a model unit. Every surface cleaned, every fixture replaced. Fresh paint, neutral and bright. The yard transformed into a small garden patio. I left a stack of custom-stamped brochures on the kitchen island with rental terms listed under a property management name I'd created, Bright Pine Living. I never contacted Connor or Natalie. I didn't need to. I had an assistant list the unit on every major rental site with photos that made it glow, knowing Natalie was browsing daily. The price was high, but just within reach. The location did the rest. Within 48 hours, they scheduled a tour. I made sure I wasn't there. Instead, I watched the security footage later, alone, with a glass of wine and a steady pulse. Natalie walked in first, her face lighting up like she'd found the answer to a prayer. Connor followed, nodding, running a hand along the counter like it already belonged to him. They moved room to room, murmuring, imagining. Then Connor picked up the brochure. His body went still. He stared at the signature line, then turned the page as if it might change. It didn't. Sandra S. Bell, owner. Natalie asked something I couldn't hear. Connor showed her the page. Her expression shifted from confusion to concern to anger. They left quickly. I never heard from them. A week later, I rented the duplex to a young couple with a toddler and a golden retriever. I gave them a discount and told them to treat it like their forever home. It was never for Connor. It never would be. The last move of didn't come with confrontation or raised voices. It came quietly, the way truth usually does when it no longer needs permission. The house they'd celebrated in, the one my mother toasted like it already belonged to Connor, didn't sit empty for long after I sold it. Liana and I didn't even have to try that hard. The renovations I'd poured years into were still fresh, the market was hungry, and the timing was perfect. We listed it high, expecting to negotiate. Instead, 3 offers came in within a week. Competitive, confident, serious. We sold it to a retired couple from Vermont who wanted warmth, quiet, and peace. They walked through the garden slowly, admired the deck, asked thoughtful questions, and thanked us for the care that had gone into the place. They didn't treat it like a stage or a trophy. They treated it like a home. That alone felt like closure. As part of the closing, Liana suggested filming a short walkthrough video for promotional content. Drone shots over the backyard at golden hour, sunlight through the kitchen windows, a calm voiceover describing features, flow, potential. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. Just the truth of what the house was when it was respected. I watched the finished video once, then uploaded it to YouTube, unlisted. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't announce it. I just copied the link, opened my email, and sent it to my mother with one line. Here's the house you toasted in. Thought you'd want to see how it turned out. She never replied. That was it. No angry response. No guilt-laced paragraph. No attempt to rewrite history. Just silence. And strangely, that silence felt cleaner than any apology she could have offered. I didn't hear from my father. I didn't hear from Connor. No passive-aggressive holiday cards arrived that year. No sudden emergencies. No "we miss you" messages dressed up as concern. The family that once felt entitled to my space, my time, my resources, simply vanished. I haven't seen them since. Years later, standing in the center of the apartment complex Liana and I co-own, watching tenants sign leases and move furniture through doors we restored, I finally understand what being seen really means. It doesn't come from applause or acknowledgement or even fairness. It comes from choosing yourself when no one else will. From building something without waiting for permission. From walking away before bitterness turns into identity. I didn't become the better daughter. I didn't win. I didn't prove anything to them. I just stopped being the backup. And in that space, everything finally fit.